All right, everyone. Shana Tova. Good New Year to all. Let's have an exciting class today. This is going to be a very, very fascinating topic. And I mentioned in the class a sneak peek on the year 5786, which we gave before the year began, that this year might indeed be the year of the beginning of the resurrection. Now, that's a big, big, big statement. You don't want to make such a statement unless you're pretty sure. Because, it's not something you can come afterwards and say funfy like this and funfy like that. If you say resurrection means dead people coming alive, right? So it's not like predicting that a couple that gets married, you say, I predict they're going to have children. Well, that's, thank God, most of the time. And if God forbid there isn't, Hashem should bless all those who need children. But you can kind of make such a prediction. When it comes to resurrection, it didn't really happen yet in all of history. Besides the word stories like Elijah the prophet resurrected, Elisha the prophet resurrected. So we had some exemption, what we call it, exceptions. But generally, the resurrection is reserved for a certain time that the resurrection will happen. So I'm not over here to be a prophet. I don't know. I'm just going to quote to you some interesting sources, which was brought to my attention, and see if we can come to some understanding. Now, what's really, really exciting is, of course, resurrection is exciting, but what's more exciting is that the shift in cosmic energy. In other words, there is the resurrection, and there is what causes the resurrection, and why we should be more concerned not about the effect, but by the cause. The cause is that resurrection happens through the most incredible divine manifestation in this world. It's when God's presence is so strongly present and revealed in the world that even dead things cannot resist the energy, and even they come alive. So that is awesome. That's what excites me. And even if we have some dead cells in our hearts and in our mind and in our being, if we have some sadness, we have some apathy, we have some indifference, we have some cynicism, whatever it is, these are all dead cells. And the resurrection means, a period of when we come alive. So may God help that everything good in this world should come alive. Everything with enormous potential should come alive. And we should be fully alive. Our soul should be fully alive, but fully expressed in our bodies. And that's what I think we're beginning to hop on over into the time of the resurrection. Quite possible. You know what? I'm going to lay out the evidence and you choose. If you agree with me, the main thing is that God should agree with me. So let's see what it says in the Torah. Let's see what it says in the Torah. Okay. So let's see where this whole concept began, that this might be the year of the resurrection. So what's the resurrection? By the way, to understand, in Judaism, there is a 13 principles of faith that was codified or defined by Maimonides, Rambam. He kind of singled out 13 ideas and said, this is the primary principles that make every a Jew a believer. If you're missing one of these principles, then you're lacking a fundamental element of your Jewish faith. One of them is, of course, for example, that the Torah came from God. Torah is from heaven. One of them is reward and punishment. One of them is that we should only pray to one God. These are all ideas. And one of them, of course, the 12th one, the very famous one, is the belief in a Moshiach, a Redeemer, that will come and bring the world into its ultimate state that God intended the world to be in. That's the 12th one, but there's a 13th one. And the 13th one is the resurrection. And it is fundamental to Jewish belief that all the dead will come back to life. Now, why that's such an important belief? It seems like it's a nice thing. It's a miracle. It's a nice thing. But why is it so fundamental? that without that, Judaism is lacking. I'm just going to say one small little idea by the Lubavitcher Rebbe that explains this, why this is so fundamental. It's based on the idea that Judaism is not concerned in the spiritual worlds. Judaism concerns itself much less with heaven than it concerns itself with earth. The main idea of where Judaism puts its focus on is that the purpose of creation is to sanctify and make the mundane and physical reality holy and godly. By doing what? By living a godly existence on earth, we channel God down into the world. When we say God to be channeled into the world, he's everywhere anyways, but that he should be present in the world in a revealed way. And that everything in this world is bursting with divine revelation and godly presence. And that's the objective of all of Torah and Judaism. That's why Judaism is so obsessed with rules and regulations that govern physical life, physical living, and so many rituals that involve action. Judaism is a very action-oriented religion. Less meditation, more action. Less transcendence, more investment. Although there is room, of course, for meditation, there's room for a lot of occupation with Torah. But even Torah, for instance, which is the highest thing a Jew can be doing, is studying Torah. The sages say, why is Torah so great? Because it leads to action. Action is very, very important. Why action? Because action engages the physical. And the point of everything is to bring God down into the physical world. So, which begins with our own bodies. If that's the case, you do all your mitzvot. Imagine this. We do all our mitzvot to sanctify our bodies. And we finally, when we spend 70, 80, 90, 100 years sanctifying and purifying our body, doing the godly thing, then the soul runs away from the body. The body gets put into the ground and it, given, a proper Jewish burial with respect and dignity and fine. But then the body disintegrates and turns and decays and gone. That's the biggest waste. What have you done? You worked so hard to develop and make something holy, and when it's finally holy, after you've channeled all those holy mitzvot into the body, all those holy godly lights into the body is gone. But when we understand the concept of resurrection, it's a whole different story. The body is eternal. The soul is going to reattach itself to a body and live in the physical world in a physical existence, in a godly existence forever and ever. And then it will be the fulfillment of what God desires, that this world will be a godly world in the physical. And what's going to make it most beautiful and most fulfilling, both for us and for God, is that God didn't do it. We did it. That's what's so special. That the lowly, physical, dark world recreated itself into holiness. Of course, by following the divine instructions. But we were the ones who did it by attaching our physical lives to God. And that's why we understand why resurrection is so fundamental. Take resurrection out and it kind of feels like it's all a waste. You've taken away the primary goal. It's not take it out. There's no goal. There's no purpose. That's the reason the world was created for to begin with, that we should achieve resurrection. If so, what do we have to die to begin with? Could just live in our bodies? Okay, that's because as we live our lives, we pick up a lot of impurities, a lot of unholiness in the physical, because the physical is prone to holy and to the unholy. So even after we've made the physical holy, there is some lingering unholiness that's there that needs to disintegrate and leave the body. And then God reconstructs the body. Now, it's very important to understand that the resurrection is not a new body. It's the same body. God literally is going to regrow the body from the original cells. And therefore, it's the same body. It's not a new body. It's our same body. It's going to be in a more refined state, but it's the same body. And that's why this is the body that we sanctify. This is the body that became holy through all the times we wrapped tefillin on the body. And all the times we cooked dinner for a poor person or gave charity or did whatever it is, we went beyond, we used our generally selfish body in a selfless manner for God's purpose, then we sanctify the physical and make our bodies holy. That very same body is going to come back and live here eternally, expressing and hosting God Almighty himself in that body for all eternity. That's our belief in Techiyas HaMeisim. So that's the fundamental principle. And that is supposed to happen only when we're kind of finished the job. When all the work has been done, throughout all the ages. Now I'm seeing that my situation over here with the recording over here seems to be making problem. I don't know what's wrong with this. Okay, may God help. Hashem should help that this should record well. It's going, but it seems like it blocks out sometimes. Okay, so why this year? What brought us to the idea that this is happening this year? So first of all, let's understand something. We're watching that somehow this year started very, very intense for the Jewish people. Very intense. Because the entire year began on Rosh Hashanah with the entire world focusing on the Jewish people. Usually the world gets busy with the Jewish people every few weeks there's another story. Sometimes every few days. Everybody's busy, especially the last couple of years. Israel has been thrust into the front, the headlines of the world consciousness and the headlines of all the newspapers and all the news stories constantly. Right? For good or for whatever, Israel is always in the news. But this year, it was like we got a head start. While all the Jews went to pray and usher in the new year, Israel was on, so to speak, on trial in the UN. And delegations and prime ministers and leaders from across the world all stood up in the UN and made their declarations regarding Israel, the state of Israel, Gaza, Palestinian state, and all of that situation. And condemning the war in Gaza and so on and so forth. This is all going on. So much so that the President of the United States, President Trump, also came and gave a speech in the UN. And of course, it was about many subjects, but Israel was very much part of it. Now today, we all know one of the major news was the meeting of Netanyahu with President Trump and some kind of a presented peace plan that is yet to be accepted by the wicked Hamas, and which we're waiting to see the outcome of it. So this is all taking place in the most crucial time of the Jewish year. And we're now within the 10 days of repentance. This is the opening salvo of the Jewish year. Not only is the opening salvo, this is like what determines the entire year. The first 10 days of the year, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, that's when God judges the world. He inscribes and decides everything at Rosh Hashanah, but he doesn't seal it until Yom Kippur. That's our tradition. And that's why it's the most solemn time of the year, the most serious time of the year. We spend extra time prayer and so on and so forth. Everything is decided. But it's not only decided for the Jewish people, it's decided for all of the world, for everything in creation. Everything in the universe is decided in these 10 days. But when you see such tension at the beginning of the year regarding the Jewish people, you can sense that there's something abuzz. And the nations in the world and the people, then they see what we realize when delegates in the UN get together and there's a sitting, and especially again when it involves Israel, we have to realize that these are supernal forces that are at play over here. These are not driven just by the human beings down here. They're being driven by angelic forces above. The powers of the nations are at play. And they're the ones driving their delegates down here. So the thoughts that go into the mind of the French Prime Minister Macron, or the English one, whatever his name is, Steinmeier, whatever his name is, and all these people to come and declare Palestinian states and all this chaos. This is all happening because there is some kind of a spiritual upheaval in the higher worlds that are driving these things to happen, including also President Trump's actions that is taking place, including what happened today. So it's all important to understand that we're just seeing the things on the outside, but there is major internal higher, and it says particularly when it comes to heads of governments, they really don't have much free choice. Individual people have free choice, but heads of government don't have that much free choice. They're being basically, they are puppets in the hands of God pulling the strings and directing his world the way he wants it. So already we see that this year started with intensity. So that shows you that something is amiss. So perhaps we're going to peel a little bit away from the surface to take a look, what might be, what's going on. Why are the nations scrambling? Let me use the words of the psalmists of King David in Psalm number 2. Lama rakshu goyim. Why are the nations up in a uproar? Why are they all up in arms? Why are they getting excited? Why are they all declaring and making announcements all across, from Australia to Belgium to Spain to Canada? Why are they all suddenly screaming Palestinian state, Palestinian state? What's driving all of that? Lama rakshu goyim. King David foresaw what happened in the UN this Rosh Hashanah 3,000 years ago. King David, that's his land, the land of Israel. And he is talking and he sees this, what's going on. By the way, in Jewish tradition, this what's happening right now, that the entire world is standing and screaming, hey, Jews, you're thieves, you're occupiers of lands that are not yours. And even Trump got infected by that virus. When he announced a few days ago, when he said, I will never allow what's it called again? A sovereignty over for Israel over Judea and Shomron, what he calls West Bank. It's based on the premise that the land of Israel doesn't belong completely to the Jewish people, which is a big lie. Now, this is so fundamental to Torah that Rashi, this is our first opening. Genesis, before you look, there's 24 books in the Torah. There's a whole lot to learn. And based on the Torah, there's commentary without an end. The Jewish library today, I went to a bookstore. I was looking for a certain book. And I was thinking, wow, so many new books, every day new books. But the Jewish library is huge. Jewish people are called the people of the book. We have so much Torah, so many scholars. And yet the first verse, the first in Genesis, so the commentary of Rashi on the first comment, is that the reason why the Torah opens up telling us a story that God created the world, even though the Torah's business is not to tell you stories about creation. Torah's business is to instruct us on how to live our life in accordance to God's will. So why does the Torah start with the story of creation? So Rashi says, because one day, and he brings this from the Midrash, that one day the nations will come and they'll all accuse Israel and the Jewish people for being thieves and stealers and occupiers of land that is not there. And God is not having it. Let me repeat that again. God is not having it. Let's do that one more time. Maybe we should do that 10 times. God is not having it. God doesn't care what happens in the UN. He lets everybody splash around and make noise and come out with their little water guns and play around. But you know what it says in the verse God does? Let's continue the psalm. Well, let's continue. Lama rakshu goyim. Why are the nations getting excited? Uleumim. And the Leumim, the empires, Yehegu, they talk. Rik. Rik means from the word rake. Rake means empty words. So I don't take President Trump's word seriously when he says, I will not allow it. I will never allow it. Trump says so, and King David says, Rik. Rik means it's empty. You know why it's empty? Because, the verse continues, because this entire assault is al Hashem, it's against God, v'al Moshiach, and it's against his anointed one. So everybody knows you can't fight City Hall. And if City Hall is God himself, then for sure you can't fight him. And that's why the psalmist continues in Psalm number 2, everybody can read it. he says, when God looks down and he watches the UN General Assembly, and all these important dignitaries getting up there. You know what King David says prophetically? He says, Yoshev b'shamayim Yitzchak, the one who sits in heaven laughs. So you want to know what would happen this Rosh Hashanah? God was having a laugh, a really good laugh. God laughs at this because God knows that all their protests and all their temper tantrums and kicking and screaming is not going to have any effect at all. Because Hashem says, I have already placed my king. I've already anointed and placed my king. Al Tzion Har Kachi, on Zion, my holy mountain. I have already laid, this is my real estate. It's my piece of land. And just like no one is going to claim the White House and say that it doesn't belong to the United States of America and that we should give it back to the tribes, the Indian tribes that lived over here. And no one is going to tell Mr. Trump that Mar-a-Lago is not his. God says no one is going to tell me that that mountain is not my mountain. And I'm going to have my temple over there. Oh, even though it has not been this way for so many years, yeah. Because we sinned, we lost it, but that was predicted in the Torah, and God says we're coming back, and we will be coming back, and we're coming back now. So that's the story. Yoshev b'shamayim Yitzchak. God is laughing. But why now? Let's get back to it. Why now? Why now? Because we're at the end of times, or let me just say it happier. We're in the beginning of times, not at the end. And God is about to appear in the world. In Yiddish, you say, mach seder of the Welt. He's going to make order in the world. So, Hashem is allowing everybody in the world to make their vote, to put their whose side they're on, to declare their allegiance with God or with the other side. So, but why this year? What makes me so sure that this is this year? Again, I'm not sure anything. I'm not sure anything. Only thing I'm sure of is that Moshiach is going to come and that the Torah is true. But exactly what I'm sharing with you now is possibility, but it seems like it. So there's a statement in the Zohar, in Parshas. Zohar is the first, well, not the first, but it's the most fundamental book on Jewish mysticism, authored by the great sage of the Talmud, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived at the time of the destruction of the temple, a little after that, of the second temple, who was probably the greatest Jewish mystic of all time, or from the top three, you might say. So, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar, I'm not necessarily that this is his statement. It's not actually. There are other sages that have their input into the book. This is a book compiled by the group of most premier mystics of all time. Anyways, and here they say like this. There is a verse that says, Mahu daite de Rebbe Lazar. What is the opinion of Rebbe Lazar? Rebbe Lazar, this is referring to Rebbe Lazar ben Azariah. Okay. And Hainu d'chsev, it says over here, the Rabbim yeshene admas afar. This is a verse in Daniel. It says, many of those that are sleeping in the ground, Yakitsu, will wake up. Okay, so this is one of the most explicit prophecies regarding resurrection. So it says that those that are sleeping in the ground will awaken. Now the Zohar pays attention to the words that are stated in Daniel. It says, Mi yeshene afar, of those that are sleeping, implying that not necessarily everybody will wake up. But don't we know that resurrection is for everyone? What does this mean? Of those that are sleeping. So Rebbe Lazar answers, Elu heimat tzadikim. These are the special righteous saintly people. Hanigdamim, they get up early. They're the first batch. They're the early bird risers. Bitchiyasam, in their resurrection. Koydem zeh, before the rest of the people. There is going to be a early resurrection. How many years is? In other words, there is an appointed time for resurrection that might happen later, but then there's an early bird resurrection for those who get up first. Let's say the first batch. How early do they get up? Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, Masayim ve'eser shanim. 210 years they will wake up. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Redi shana. 214 years. So we have two opinions about when the early bird risers will be in the resurrection. Rabbi Yehuda says 210 years, and Rabbi Yitzchak says 214 years. Now, it doesn't exactly say 210 years when, before the others, but what does before the others mean? In my last class, I said it was kind of questionable. I don't know, but I think it's becoming very clear to me that this is referring to, in Judaism, we have a concept that the world as we know it, the time that is allotted for the entire program that has to run its course until the world reaches its zenith is a 6,000 year period. Just like God created the world in 6 days. So just like God creates the world in 6 days, and then God takes a partner. Who's the partner? God partners with the human race, that the human race should perfect the world that he created. God is quick. He does it in 6 days. Our perfection is 6,000 years. The reason why our perfection is 6,000 years is because there's a verse that says, Ki elef shanim beinecha ki yom esmol, that 1,000 years is by God a day. Which means the ratio that what God sees as 1 day is by us 6,000 years. So what God can get done in 1 day, we can get done in 6,000 years. And not exactly that idea, but that kind of is the end. God is God, obviously. He's infinite and omnipotent and everything. But God empowers us. We don't do anything on our own. God empowers us to perfect the world, but it works together. He did the world in 6 days, and then he entered Shabbos. What Shabbos? Shabbos is the world that you don't have to perfect anymore. Shabbos, everything is perfect already. That's why we're not allowed to do any work on Shabbos. It's just a day of delight and pleasure and enjoyment. So too, we work the world, perfect the world for 6,000 years, and at the end of the year 6,000, which by the way comes out in the year 2140, 2140 is going to be the year 6,000. That's in the secular Gregorian calendar. So that's when we kind of, the 6 days end and Shabbos begins, the great cosmic Shabbos begins, and then the world is already doesn't need perfection. Now, by that time, when the year 6,000 comes, everybody, whoever is dead has to be alive already, because nothing new is happening in the 6,000 year. In that, from 6,000 to 7,000, it's already the party. So everybody has to wake up before the party. So the Techiyas HaMeisim happens before. So it comes out that when it says 210 years and 214 years, it's talking about the last 210 years and the last 214 years before the year 6,000. Oh, so where are we standing? So if 2140 is the year 6,000, we go back 200 years is, I'm sorry, not 2140. I made a mistake. Sorry. It's not the year 2140. It's 2240. So now we go back. 2140 is 100 years. Back. 2140 is 200 years. And 210 years, you got minus another 10 years. So it is 2030. In 4 years from now, 4 years from now, we hit the second date. The date Rabbi Yehuda says is the time of the resurrection. The year 2030, just 4 years. In the Hebrew year, it's the year 5790. Tov Shin Tzadik, 4 years from now. However, according to Rabbi Yitzchak's calculation, who says that the resurrection happens 214 years before the year 6000. So where does that land us? And we have to go back 4 years. So 2030 minus 4 is 2026. This coming year, the secular calendar is 2026, but on the Hebrew calendar, which is the real calendar, the Jewish calendar, where God sets time, starts on Rosh Hashanah, it's this year, 5786, which is this year. It's 214 years before the year 6000. So I believe that we just crossed the threshold into a whole new era of existence called resurrection. And we ought to expect some dead people to come alive. Now, we can start by ourselves coming alive, right? If we're dead, we got to come alive. That's a good start to it. But now, so how does he derive this? How does Rabbi Yitzchak derive this? He derives it because it says a verse, Vayerd mi Yaakov, which is a verse in the Torah portion of Balak. It's actually one of the words that the Gentile prophet, Bilam, you can't blame the Jews on this. This came from the Gentile prophet. Okay, the Gentile prophet, his name is Bilam. He came to curse the Jewish people. He had negative, really bad intentions. And God overpowered his mouth. And God jammed him, so to speak, and jammed him with blessings. And God was his teleprompter. And he needed to say what God told him to say. And he gave big blessings. All the way in the end of that Torah portion, he prophesizes the future of Israel, the future of the Jewish people, and the future of the world. And he says, V'yerd mi Yaakov, that a great leader of Jacob will get up. That Jacob, the Jewish people, will then have the power to dominate over the world. Yerd is from the word domination, dominion. Referring to Moshiach's kingdom, in which he will dominate the entire world. Okay, so how does that say resurrection? There's nothing about resurrection there. So I'm troubled by that. I don't know. Rabbi Yitzchak says the word yerd, let me just look at it. The word yerd, which means to dominate in Hebrew, is spelled Yud Reish Daled. Yud Reish Daled in numeric, in Jewish numerology, Reish Yud Daled, every Hebrew alphabet is also a number, equals 214. So we see from here that the resurrection happens at 2:15. I was puzzled by this because where do you see resurrection? If anything, it says Moshiach will. It says that Moshiach will come this year. Moshiach will reveal himself this year. Why resurrection? I have my answer. And my answer is that Moshiach is part of the resurrection. And therefore, the fact that Moshiach and definitely he's in the first batch. If Mashiach is not from those that are physically alive at the time of the redemption, like the Talmud says in Masechtas Sanhedrin, Mashiach can be from the living or from those who passed away. So then he himself is resurrected. Now the Lubavitcher Rebbe said this regarding his father-in-law. It's printed in Likutei Sichos, Chelik Beis, second volume. It's a sicha, it's a talk from Yud Gimel Shvat. The 13th day of Shvat, just 2 days after his father-in-law's first yahrzeit, 2 days after the Rebbe became Rebbe. So in that over there, you can look it up. The Rebbe asks, people have complaints on me. How is it that I'm saying that my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, is going to take us out of exile when he passed away? So the Rebbe says, it says in books, it says in Sfarim, that there is going to be an early resurrection. That even though mostly the general resurrection happens a while after Mashiach comes, maybe even 40 years after the Mashiach comes. But there is an early resurrection. And therefore, the biggest tzaddikim, the greatest righteous, will get up. So therefore, the Rebbe is saying, my father-in-law of saintly memories, going to take us out of exile. He's going to, he can be of those who are being resurrected. Okay? Just interesting to know. So, and that's the only explanation I can have of where you see, how does Rabbi Yitzchak say, Vayer, what does it have to do with Techiyas HaMeisim? With the resurrection? Vayer, Mashiach is going to rule. But if Mashiach to rule has to actually be resurrected, so it's really cool. Good. Now, let's delve a little better into this. So what's it's nice. There is a Zohar, there's a Medrash, 214 years. There's a lot of things. How do we know this is for real? So I'd like to go back to a page before this in the Zohar. The Zohar gives a very interesting order of how everything will go down. How will the whole process, because we know when the coming of Mashiach has various different stages to it, different parts to it. There's a lot of prophecies, which we can call it end times, or achris hayamim in Hebrew. But a lot of things are supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen? The temple is supposed to be rebuilt, the third temple. The other thing that's supposed to happen is that the Jewish people, the gathering of the exiles, all of Israel is supposed to go back to the land of Israel. We also know then there's resurrection, of course. So what's the order? What happens first? What happens next? Mashiach, of course, also arriving and revealing himself. So there's a whole bunch of things. What's going to be the order? So the Zohar makes a little bit order over here. The Zohar asks, is Yemos HaMashiach, are the days of the Mashiach and Techiyas HaMeisim, are they not one thing? Because again, all these things were very, very, very obscure and very cryptic throughout the ages. And most of these things we couldn't know. Rambam himself says it, that these things we will not know until they will happen. So those who tried to decipher it before were hitting a brick wall, or they really couldn't do it. It was purposely concealed in a way that you couldn't figure it out. The greatest minds tried to decodify it and they couldn't do it. But Rambam says we will, while it's happening, we will then it will make sense. There's no question that it's happening now. We're living in end times. So now we can make an attempt to see if so I'm going to give you my timeline based on what I'm seeing. It could be I'm right, it could be I'm wrong, but it's exciting. What I'd like to share with you is exciting. It's getting exciting me, and it might excite you too. So, what does it say? He says like this. The Zohar says no. The days of Mashiach and resurrection are not exactly the same. The Tanan, because we learned in a Mishnah, in a statement from the early Beis Hamikdash Kaidem LeKibbutz Galuyos. The first thing that's going to happen is we're going to have a temple. And only after the temple is rebuilt in Jerusalem, then all Jews are going to come back to Israel. Beis Hamikdash Kaidem LeKibbutz Galuyos. The Beis Hamikdash being built is before the gathering of the exiles. Kibbutz Galuyos, and then the gathering of the exiles, Kaidem Techiyas HaMeisim, is going to be before the resurrection. If that's the case, it seems like my whole idea that the resurrection is starting right now, this year, seems faulty, because we don't even have a temple yet. According to the Zohar, you have to first have, number one, we have to have a temple. Number two, we need to have the gathering of the exiles. That means all Jews have to be returned to Israel already. And number, and then after that is the resurrection. Okay. Let's trust. We'll deal with that soon. And it says, therefore, Techiyas HaMeisim or Achron Shebekulam, the last major event that's supposed to happen in Messianic times is resurrection, the resurrection of the dead. How do we know all of this? So the Zohar says we derive it from a verse in Psalms, against Psalms. In the end of Psalms, I think it's Psalm 147. 147. I think it's from 147. We say it in our morning prayers every day. It says, Boinei Yerushalayim Hashem. God builds Jerusalem. Okay, Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt. Nitchei Yisroel Yachanes. The scattered of Israel he will gather. Haroifei l'shvurei lev. The one who heals the brokenhearted. So the King David is telling us in order. First, Jerusalem is going to be built, and the Zohar understands Jerusalem being built means not Agrippa Street, not King George Street, not even the nice hotels, the Waldorf Astoria and Mamila Hotel Mall. That's not the building of Jerusalem. The building of Jerusalem that's the building of the Beis HaMikdash. That's Jerusalem, building the temple. After the Jerusalem and the temple is built, Nitchei Yisrael Yachanes, that's when all Jews are going to gather to Jerusalem, to Israel. So the ingathering of the exile happens after that. And finally, what does it say next? Hashem will heal the brokenhearted. What is that referring to? That's referring to resurrection. Because all the brokenhearted, all those who lost loved ones, and their hearts are broken, and you give them, we go, someone loses a loved one, God forbid, you go, you do a Shiva visit, and we offer consolation, but nobody's consoled. Time heals a little bit, but it doesn't really, really, really fix the wound. The only real consolation is when they will come back. And that's what it means. God will heal every broken heart. Everybody that departed in this world is coming back. And that happens last, because that's what the verse says. Okay? So now that we have that setting. If so, I have a very big problem and a very big dilemma. In order for the temple to be built, one thing the Zohar doesn't say was Moshiach. In order for the temple to be built, Moshiach has to be here before this. So the Zohar did not even mention that. But we're going to set up the order based on this Zohar. The first thing that has to happen is that Moshiach has to arrive. That's number one. The next thing that has to happen is that that the temple is going to be built, which according to Maimonides, which is the halacha, Moshiach is the one that builds the temple. Or even if Mashiach does not build the temple and it will come down from heaven, like Rashi says and Tosfos says, some Jewish opinion, that the temple will come down from heaven, built from above, which will be awesome. But even that, who's going to trigger that? Who's going to make that happen? Mashiach. Like Moses leading the Jewish people out of Egypt, splitting the sea, Mashiach will bring the temple down from heaven. So whether Mashiach himself will have it built below, whether it will come down, there's a lot of discussion on that. But you first have to have a clear Mashiach in this world. Mashiach, the building of the temple, the gathering of the exiles, and afterwards resurrection. So if this is the case, when we're really backed up, what are we talking about? Now it's the year 214, supposed to be the time of the resurrection, but hold it. Where's Moshiach? Hasn't been here yet, hasn't been revealed. Where is the gathering of the temple? Not only is there no construction yet, there is a ridiculous mosque on the temple. Occupied land. Okay? That and with a few billion Muslims, not ready to relocate yet, right? Finally, we don't have yet the gathering of the exiles. Not only aren't there all the Jews in the land of Israel, but so many Jews don't even have any desire, at least on a conscious level, to go to Israel. They're completely assimilated and happy, and so many Jews even anti-Israel, sadly. So it doesn't look like that is happening too fast. And only after that resurrection. So it seems like we're still a long way to go. So let's not give up. Don't leave now. Just hang around. But let's find out. Maybe there's a different story over here. Okay, I'm just gathering the evidence from this passage of the Zohar. Now, there's a lot of Jewish sources, and I haven't scratched the surface. And I'm just focusing on one particular passage of the Zohar. That's what we're learning today. And based on this Zohar is where we're gleaning our evidence from, and maybe from some other sources. But then the Zohar continues. And the Zohar is going to give us a little bit of a time frame of how long these things are supposed to take. So the Zohar is like this. We said before that the gathering of the exiles is before the resurrection. Okay? The gathering of the exiles is going to be before the resurrection. How many years? When will the gathering of the exiles begin? I don't know if the completion, but at least the whole process of the gathering of the exiles. So the Zohar says, Arbaim shana koydem Kibbutz Galuyos, Techiyas HaMeisim, that 40 years before the resurrection is going to be the gathering of the exiles. So the gathering of the exiles starts 40 years before the resurrection. Kedar Minan, and the Zohar brings a verse for that. Now, then the Zohar asks, what's going to happen during those 40 years of the gathering of the exile? Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Reb Broika. Rav Kahana says in the name of Reb Broika, Kibbutz Galuyos ad Techiyas HaMeisim, from the time of the gathering of the exiles until the resurrection of the dead, kama tsaris, kama milchamois yisoidedu al Yisroel. A lot of wars and a lot of trouble will be aroused against the Jewish people. Incited. The Zohar uses the term incited. There will be an incitement against the Jewish people during the time of the gathering of the exiles. During that period, which is a 40-year period, during that time, there will be a lot of trouble for the Jewish people. The ashrei hanimlat mehem, and fortunate are those who survive this. So it seems like this, what might have been like, hey, this dandy period, this incredible blissful period, when the gathering of the exiles and everybody's flocking to Israel, suddenly we find out that those 40 years seem to be years of tremendous bloodshed and tremendous pain and suffering and war and who knows what against Israel. Fortunate are those who survive. It says in Daniel that in that time, who will be saved? Those are written in the book. Now, these are very important information. You got to hold. Stay with me. And Rabbi Yehuda says a different verse which shows that this is going to be in a very intense time, because it says Yizbareru v'Yislabnu v'Yitzarfu. This is going to be a cleansing period where everybody is going to be cleansed and purged and purified. And Rabbi Yitzchak brings a third verse, I'm going to clean them like I clean silver. And I'm going to inspect them. Like you inspect gold, till I get the purest of the pure, God says. And those days will be days, Asher, you will say, I don't desire those days. But from the time that those troubles will end until Techiyas HaMeisim will be 40 years. That means after 40 years of those troubles will be the resurrection. Okay, so now we have another piece of the puzzle we're going to throw into this. What do we have over here? We said like this. Moshiach arrives. He builds a temple. Then there's supposed to be gathering of exile. And then the resurrection. But we're saying that during the time of the gathering of the exiles, it's going to be a 40-year period, which during that time, there's going to be tremendous wars against the Jewish people. It's going to be a horrible time. And only after that is going to be the resurrection. So I have a very simple question to ask everybody over here. I totally don't get this. If the gathering of the exiles that we're talking about is the gathering of the exiles that happens after the temple is built and after Moshiach is revealed and after all that, that gathering of the exiles, that's what we're referring to over here. How is it possible that during that time there's going to be wars and suffering for the Jewish people? What do I mean? Ask a simple question. After the stunning revelation of Moshiach in this world, after the temple is built in Jerusalem, which according to our tradition is going to be a temple that's going to come down with fire from the heaven. Or even if it's not, but Mashiach is going to build it. And the divine presence is going to come down to dwell amongst the Jewish people in a visible way, more than it even was in the time of Moses in the desert. Is anybody going to start up with the Jewish people during that time? Is there going to be anti-Semitism during that time? When there is such divine revelation, such miracles in the world? I mean, I can't say, I don't know, everything is possible, but it's very, very unlikely to my understanding. You have already Mashiach revealed. You have already a temple built. Obviously, Mashiach has some muscle power if he can remove the thing, and something happens earth-shattering that we can remove the Al-Aqsa Mosque from there, and the temple is built. You have this figure of Mashiach, who's the greatest human being ever to live. You have the divine presence in Jerusalem for 40 years already, so much so that all the Jews are gathering, that everybody's coming up, and yet there is suffering, and you're going to say about those 40 years, you have no desire. How can it be we have no desire during those 40 years to live or to be there when the temple just got built? I think this is a slam dunk proof that we have to reread over here a little bit. And as I said, these things, we don't know how they will happen until they will happen, but I will make the argument that they happened already. Therefore, I will say like this. Just like I said earlier, there will be two resurrections. There will be a main resurrection that's going to happen after the full gathering of the exile. If that happens further down the road, when there's going to be a mass resurrection, when everybody is going to come back, that's a later resurrection. But there is another resurrection. I told you this. The Rebbe says it, but this is clearly discussed by the Rabbi Saadya Gaon, a great Jewish thinker, scholar, Talmudist, genius of a genius. Rabbi Saadya Gaon lived even before, when was he? Rabbi Saadya Gaon, I think, lived in the 9th century or 8th century. Again, I'm not a historian, so but around that time. And he was a very fundamental figure in Jewish belief system and in developing and the ideology of Judaism. So Rav Saadya Gaon writes in his book, clear, that there is going to be, and he has a tradition for this, two Techiyas HaMeisim. There is the general Techiyas HaMeisim, and there is an early Techiyas HaMeisim, which I mentioned earlier. Well, which based on the Zohar says the same thing, even before Rabbi Saadya Gaon. The Zohar says tzaddikim will get up early. Now, who's going to be part of the first batch? Rabbi Saadya Gaon says, you know who's going to be part of the first batch? Moshe, Aaron, because they're going to be there immediately when the temple is built. Because the Talmud says, when the temple is going to be built, and we're going to have a question how we're going to do things, because we're not going to know. So the Talmud says, what's the problem? Moshe and Aaron are going to be there. You can speak to Moses. You can ask Aaron, the high priest. But hold it, if the resurrection only happens much later, how is Moses going to be there right at the beginning? The Talmud deals over there with a question that might come up as soon as the temple is built. And the Talmud says, well, we're going to have Moses then. But hold it, isn't the resurrection supposed to happen 40 years later or a long time later? So from here it's derived that Moshe is going to be there immediately, Aaron is going to be there immediately, and many, many of the great saintly tzaddikim will get up right away. So says the Radvaz, and so says the Ritva, Masechtas Rosh Hashanah. I'm just giving you some of the great Jewish scholars who state this explicitly. And again, we have a source of the Zohar. There is an early Techiyas HaMeisim. There's an early resurrection. Now, bear with me. Bear with me now. Now, what I'm going to suggest is just like there is two Techiyas, even though I didn't see this explicitly, but to me it's so clear from the Zohar I just read to you that there's also two levels of gathering of exile. There is going to be the mass gathering of exile when all the Jewish people will come up to the land of Israel. No Jew will be left behind. Everybody will come. Even the most assimilated Jew, even the ones that are like so entrenched in who knows what, so disconnected, every spark is going to come back. That's the gathering of the exiles that happens after the temple is built. But there is a gathering of exiles that happens before the temple is built. And that's the gathering of exiles. Now, when does that gathering of exile happen? Also before the resurrection. Just like the second gathering of the exiles happens before the resurrection. Again, the mass resurrection, the collective resurrection for everybody. And again, I don't know the year when that's going to happen. According to some, that happens all the way in the end of the sixth millennium. That means all the way close to the year 6000. Close to the year 220, 240. That's according to some scholars who had a tradition that it's happening all the way at the end. Before that, there's going to be a gathering of exiles where all the Jews will come, mass gathering of exiles. All living Jews will come back to the land of Israel. However, as we said earlier, there's going to be an early Techiyas HaMeisim, which happens right by the coming of Moshiach. And as I mentioned to you from the Rebbe, that Techiyas HaMeisim is actually going to happen literally coinciding with the coming of Moshiach. And Moshiach himself might be part of that resurrection. As I will still explain. So before that, there will also be a gathering of exiles. But that gathering of exiles is going to be a more subtle gathering of exiles. And that's the gathering of exiles that we're talking about, these 40 years, these dark years. 40 years of dark years, of difficult years. So my thesis over here is as follows, if I am right. It's regarding the first resurrection that the Zohar is saying, and this is not my thesis, the Zohar says actually, the 214 years that the Zohar says explicitly is the first resurrection. The Zohar says it's the tzaddikim, it's the righteous people, it's the first resurrection. So the 40 years before the gathering of the exiles is 40 years before that resurrection. So if this is the year 214 years, the year 2026, or the secular calendar 2025 going into 2026, the Hebrew calendar 5786, if this is the year of the gathering of the resurrection, of the first resurrection, the opening salvo, if you might say, of the resurrection, the first batch of resurrection, then the gathering of exiles that are going to take 40 years, which is going to be a very dark period where wars are going to happen and you're going to be so frustrated and you're going to feel like, why? I don't even want to live. It can be so difficult, is actually the 40 years that just passed us. And we just ended those 40 years. Now that might sound shocking and say, well, what kind of gathering of exiles were here? Well, you'll all agree that it wasn't such an easy 40 years. But let's see, when does it take us back to? It takes us back to 1986. In other words, what we're saying, the 40 years before this year is from 1986 to 2026. Or in the Hebrew year, Tafshin Mem Vav, which is the year 5746, was the beginning of the year of the gathering of the exiles, of the 40-year period. Now, prior to that, prior to those 40 years, before even the gathering of the exiles, we have to realize one thing. Moshiach has to be in play already before. Because nothing happens without the Moshiach. The entire redemption is being driven by Moshiach. But just like there is two Techiyas HaMeisim, two resurrections, and two gatherings of the exiles, there's two biases HaMoshiach. There's two arrivals of Moshiach. Those that were listen to my classes are familiar with this concept, and I'm going to explain this just shortly, just briefly, I mean. The Midrash says, and so it is in many statements of the sages, that Moshiach will be a human being born to a father and a mother, and he will start having huge impact on the Jewish people. As Maimonides speaks about Mashiach. And he will affect the Jewish people during the time of exile. And he will actually inspire the Jewish people to increase their observance and keep mitzvot and so on and so forth, and wage wars on behalf of the Jewish people. Not necessarily that he's a general and goes out to wage physical battles, but he fights for the Jewish people on many, many levels. Then he will reveal himself as Moshiach. But then immediately after that, I don't know, right? He will be concealed and hidden. In other words, he will begin the process. The Messianic process will be triggered by this individual. Then he will be concealed. This is the concept called Nigla. He will, similar to Moses, to Moshe. Moshe came to the Jewish people in the first Redeemer. This is a Midrash in Shir HaShirim, Perek Beis. Ma Goyel Rishon, just like the first Redeemer, Nigla, was revealed to the Jewish people. V'nichsa, and then he became concealed from the Jewish people. V'chayzer v'nigla, and then he reappeared. Because Moses came to the Jewish people, told them they're going out of Egypt, and then he was gone for many years. And then Moses comes back. So too the final Redeemer will reveal himself. He will be concealed, and then he will be revealed again. So this is my understanding from everything I understand. I'm just going to cut straight to it so we don't waste anybody's time. I'm just going to cut straight to it. The person we are talking about is the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who has literally the biggest influence on the Jewish people since Abraham or Moses. The man who actually affects Jews across the entire world, all over. Not just Jews, but Gentiles alike. The man who has emissaries in every corner of the world, inspiring Jews to mitzvahs. Never in the history of the world did such a thing ever exist. The man who presidents, including President Trump, yesterday was the anniversary of him, 2 days ago actually, Sunday was the anniversary of a year ago, him going to pray at the Rebbe's, what they call the Rebbe's resting place in Queens. And on that day, and Trump wasn't doing good in the polls and in the predictions. And the day he went to pray by the Rebbe, everything turned around and he started rising. Up. And then he won the election. Just 2 weeks ago, Andrew Cuomo also went to visit because Andrew Cuomo is now up against the race against the rabid anti-Semite Mamdani. May God protect us. And Eric Adams dropped out of the race, and Cuomo now 2 weeks ago, someone told me he was there. Cuomo came to pray over there. Milei from Israel, from Argentina, every time he comes to America, goes to pray at that place. Eric Adams, when he was mayor in New York, would go. I'm talking about non-Jews. I'm saying went once a month to pray at the Rebbe's place. Sarah Netanyahu was there just today because her husband was busy with intense negotiations, so she went to pray. All the hostage families, when they come to America and they want to pray, go to pray by the Rebbe. Millions of Jews from across the world constantly visit and come to pray in that holy place. The Rebbe's name and fame reaches the entire world. In 1990, 1989, 1990, 1991, and 1992, 1993, till the middle of 1994, there was a Messianic fervor bubbling around the Rebbe. It really, in Chabad, in Lubavitch, from day one, Chassidim felt and knew deep in their hearts that they have their man. They can see that this was not an ordinary leader of the Jewish people. But the Rebbe did not allow any public display of that belief, although privately the Rebbe acknowledged it. Meaning Chassidim would come in, great Chassidim would come into private audiences, they would refer to Rebbe as Moshiach, and the Rebbe never told them no. But publicly the Rebbe did not allow it. And all of that changed in 1990, 1991, 1992. The Rebbe's attitude changed. And again, it was on and off. There were some rebuttals, never rebuttals saying that he's not, but many rebuttals against an open calling him of that way. But when as 1990 and 1991, which the Rebbe declared then as the time of redemption has arrived, the Rebbe started removing his mask and allowed more and more, so much so, and I was one of those back then, the thousands of people who signed a petition, signatures, which we accepted upon ourselves the kingdom of Moshiach. And it was brought to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, thank you so much. You should continue and do more and more. And the time is, Azman Garama, the time is appropriate for this. And then, a lot. And the Rebbe did not hide it. And then at that time, the Rebbe himself, talk after talk, kept on mentioning that Mashiach is already revealed in the world. And that his name is Menachem, which is the Rebbe's name. And that his second name is Mendel, which is the second name of the Rebbe. And that the house that he lives in, which is called 770 Eastern Parkway, so the Rebbe came up with this idea that 770 is the numeric value of Beis Mashiach, the house of Mashiach. And that it says about Mashiach Ufaratzta, that he's going to break open the borders of the world to bring Judaism everywhere and godliness everywhere. The Rebbe said the word paratzta, which is the energy of Mashiach, is the numeric value in Hebrew of 770. And then the Rebbe had a stroke. As predicted by the Medrash, that Mashiach suffers a lot of pain and agony. And as it said, again, there's verses for that as well. And even though people get all scared about this because this is Christian stuff, well, the Christians stole it from the Jewish people. The Pope, I keep on saying this, the Pope wears a yarmulke that does not make a yarmulke not Jewish because the Pope wears it. So Christianity took the whole Messiah from the Judaism. Therefore, we should drop Mashiach. Mashiach is not a Jewish concept because Christians believe in Mashiach too. So the concept that Mashiach will suffer is a Jewish concept. And the Rebbe had a stroke. And during an entire year, the Rebbe would come out on the porch, and thousands of his Chassidim, yours truly included, I stood there, watched it with my own eyes. We sang loud and clear, with all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our concentration, and said, Yechi Adoneinu Ma'areinu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach Le'olam Va'ed. Long live our master, our king, our revered teacher, King Moshiach, forever and ever. And the Rebbe encouraged it. To me, the Rebbe is a divine man. When I say a divine man means a person who is a complete chariot, or maybe even deeper than that, to Hashem's light. That's the concept that we understand by many tzaddikim, especially the tzaddikim of the tzaddikim. So he didn't make any mistakes, and he didn't allow, it wasn't like he thought so, and he wanted so, and he prayed so, and he come out publicly for the entire world to see, and it be televised for the entire world to see. There is no question in my mind that that was the revelation of Moshiach. But that was the first revelation of Moshiach. Now, so if you're asking me, Moshiach has to come before everything? Yes, he came. That's why I never use the term, you'll hear in my class, I don't use Mashiach coming. I mean, ever. I try not to. I use Mashiach revealing himself, because Mashiach came already. In 1990, 1991, meaning there was a revelation already. But then there was a concealment, like it says it will be concealed. Now Rashi says Mashiach will be concealed for 45 years. Look it up, Rashi, in the end of Daniel. Now, but good news, when does the 45 years start? So very, very interesting. We're just about there. Because in 1982, watch this. This is I'm telling you, you're going to fall off your chair by the time I'm done with this. In 1982, the Rebbe declared that year, there is a famous thing that people do every year, is that they name the years. They take the Hebrew year and they use the first letters and it becomes an acronym. Who started that? I mean, it was something that was done in years, but the Rebbe made it very, very, very public. He started it in 1982, Tavshin Mem Beis. And the Rebbe declared Tavshin Mem Beis, Tiyash Nas Bias Moshiach. Let this be the year of the coming of Moshiach. 1982. The Rebbe spoke that year that year is a case. It's an end time. Meaning it was a known end time that year, 1982, is the time of Mashiach's arrival. So to me, it's clear that so even though the world didn't witness a Mashiach's arrival in 1982, there is no question in my mind that in the Rebbe's soul and some deep level inside of him, some higher element was then triggered or released or opened up in his neshama. That's what the Arizal says, and Chassam Sofer says it, and that Mashiach evolves. What does that mean? That in his earlier days, he doesn't even know that he is Mashiach, but then he has a upgrade in his consciousness, and he's revealed to him. In 1982, now please listen, this is mind-blowing. In 1982, truth is 1981, on Yud Aleph Nisan, on the Rebbe's birthday, a half a year before 1982, and I'm telling you why 1982 is very, very significant. We're going to get to that in a moment. In 1981, on the Rebbe's birthday in Yud Aleph Nisan, the Rebbe introduced a campaign. The campaign is that we should get every single Jewish child inscribed in a Torah, which means you can't write a name in the Torah, but every single Jewish child across the world should have a letter in the Torah that they should purchase, which means they should pay $1, and that a Torah will be written with the intention of that child that his name is written in the Torah. And the Rebbe pushed this campaign for the next couple of years, driving and driving and driving. First he began with the children, and then he drove that everybody should get a letter in the Torah. Now what's astounding is that the Rebbe was kept on saying during those years, and the Rebbe quoted the verse from Daniel that the Zohar says over here, that there's going to be a time that very intense things are going to happen, and the only ones who are going to be saved are those that are found to be written in the book. So the Rebbe was pushing that everybody should be written in the book, and the Rebbe said, what's this book? This is the Holy Torah. Every Jew should have a letter in the Torah. At that time, no one knew what the Rebbe was wanted. See, these are so amazing things. This is all in hindsight. We're beginning to see Mashiach in action. He's pushing like crazy. And, the Rebbe would demand that people should send him every week. How many children did you enlist? The Rebbe was like in super overdrive. Get me names. I think it was before Shavuos. The Rebbe told everybody to stop doing everything and just get as many children across the world signed up for these Torahs. Why? Those 5 years, remember we said 45 years, that Mashiach will be concealed, revealed. So you can look, and I don't have the calculation of this, but there is a rabbi, his name is Rabbi Isser Weisberg, and according to his calculations, the final end time in the book of Daniel ends with this year, 2026, and the end time is actually following year, 5787. And he points based on, there's a certain amount of, I'll tell you the gist of it. The gist of it is that in Daniel, it gives a certain amount of years it says when the end date is, and it gives you a clue from when something disgusting was made, something despicable was made. And from that time, you count so many years, and that's the amount of time of the end time. And then he says you have to add 45 years. In other words, there is a certain amount of years mentioned in Daniel from a certain event of something disgusting that was built. And then after that period of time, there is another 45 years, and then you're going to hit bingo when the full redemption is going to be. So Rabbi Weisberg's calculation is as follows. He says what a lot of people made those calculations and failed because they misdiagnosed what that despicable thing is that it's talking about. He comes to the conclusion that that's when they built the Al-Aqsa on the Temple Mount. And that's what Daniel is referring to. That from that date, you count from the year that the Muslims built something to block the temple and built a mosque on that holy site, you count X amount of years. Now, that amount of years, I don't remember how many years it is, ends in 1982. Then from that day and on starts a 45-year count. Now, those 45 years is what Rashi also says, Mashiach is revealed and then concealed and revealed. Thank God Mashiach was not concealed for that entire 45-year period, but based on that, comes out 1982 is when Moshiach, and by the way, you should know something really interesting. From 1981, 82 is when the Rebbe started storming the heavens with "We want Moshiach now." Chabad went gung-ho Moshiach. The Rebbe dropped everything for Moshiach, starting in 1980, 81, 82. It was that decade. It's like that's when the Rebbe went out like storming with the writing of the Sefer Torah and doing everything. Now, let's go to 1986. We're saying that the gathering of the exiles begins in 1986. What are we talking about? 40 years before the resurrection, which lands us at this year. So get ready for something awesome. You see, a lot of Jews returned to Israel in 1948, 1945. There's been since the in the 1700 the 18th century, there was already massive, big waves of aliyah of Jews. The Hasidim went up. The Lithuanian Jews went up. Lots of Jews, the students of the Vilna Gaon went up to Israel. The students of the Baal Shem Tov went. The Baal Shem Tov himself wanted to go to Israel. The Alter Rebbe of Chabad wanted to go, but then was forced to stop and come back and take care of his flock in Russia. But many Jews were coming up. The Israel began to blossom again. And of course, throughout the 1800s and throughout the 1900s. Now, when the state of Israel was established, and many rabbis and people had the belief that the state of Israel is the beginning of the redemption. And that when we were given a promise, when the prophets, the religious Zionists, the non-religious Zionists were not concerned about that. But the religious Zionists were of the opinion that the gathering of the exiles is being fulfilled in the 1940s and definitely 1948. And the mass aliyah of Jews to the state of Israel, to the land of Israel at that time, is all part of the gathering of the exiles. Now, I'm not going to get into halachic debate with them. It's an opinion. They had the opinion. I'm telling you what the Rebbe's opinion was. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's opinion was that, God forbid, that had nothing, that was not his chalta de Geula. It's not the beginning of the redemption. At all. The Rebbe was vehemently opposed by anybody saying that that's the beginning of the redemption. And the Rebbe was also opposed to say that that is Kibbutz Galuyos, the gathering of the earth. That doesn't mean that that's not a preparation for Kibbutz Galuyos. That could be. But to call it Kibbutz Galuyos, the prophet, which is already Messianic, no. Now, why was the Rebbe opposed to it? One of the reasons, I can't say it's the only reason, but definitely one of the reasons is because the Rebbe is of the opinion that the entire Moshiach process is driven by Moshiach. Moshiach himself, the person, drives the process, he's the one who affects Kibbutz Galuyos, the gathering of the exiles, is affected and driven by Moshiach. The establishment of the state of Israel was Theodor Herzl, who was the founder of the Zionist movement, and Ben Gurion, who's the first prime minister, and all of these were secular Jews. Not only were they not Mashiach, but they weren't even concerned with creating a godly, holy land of Israel. They were actually using the land of Israel as an alternative to Jewish observance. And that's the total opposite of what Moshiach is. Moshiach is the Jewish people returning to God. And if we're returning to God, we're returning to care about his Torah and care about his mitzvot. So to give the Jewish people a certain nationalistic identity, and that should come in place of the Torah identity that has always been the identity of the Jewish people, that the Rebbe, and not just the Rebbe, but many great Jewish God-fearing people and great rabbis vehemently opposed. But the Rebbe was very, very strongly opposed to that. There's countless letters of the Rebbe saying, how can you even begin to say that? Comes out that whatever we saw the Jews gathering to Israel, all this period of time, and establishing the state, and many Jews living there, this is not part of the gathering of the exiles. It's not it's not inspired by wanting to be connected to God, and it wasn't driven by Moshiach himself. It wasn't triggered by Moshiach. But the Rebbe did say something in 1990, 1991, and 1992. In 1992, or 1990, or starting in 89, when the Iron Curtain came down, and the mass immigration of millions of Jews from Russia, about 1 million Jews left the previous Soviet Union and went up to Russia, the Rebbe identified that first in the earlier talks at that time. The Rebbe uses the term me'ein v'dugma. It's somewhat, and it's similar to the Kibbutz Galuyos, to the gathering of the exiles that's going to be through Mashiach. But as the Rebbe kept on talking, the Rebbe was like revealing more and more. And I have to share with you something stunning. The last talk the Rebbe gave, literally, Parshas Vayakel. 2 days later, the Rebbe had a stroke. The last time the Rebbe spoke to us on Shabbos Parshas Vayakel, 1992, the Rebbe referred to the mass alidei. He doesn't mention Russia, but he says, we see now more Jews going up to the land of Israel than ever before. This is the beginning of Kibbutz Galuyos. This is the beginning of the gathering of the exiles. So here the Rebbe did call it the gathering of the exiles. Why? Because that aliyah was not affected by the secular Zionists. They're not the ones who made it happen. The state of Israel did not cause it to happen. There was one person responsible for the entire toppling of the Soviet regime. His name was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the Russians knew it. Enemy of the state, number one, in USSR was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. First the 6th Rebbe and then the 7th Rebbe. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, and then his successor, our Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, from 1917 was still the 5th Rebbe, Reb Shalom Dov Ber. But these 3 Chabad Rabbeim, they were the ones who led the campaign to not only keep Judaism alive and to keep Jews thriving against a ruthless, monstrous, murderous regime that took all of its efforts to try to snuff out and wipe out and uproot and eradicate the minute trace of Judaism and connection to God, trying to replace it with atheism. When the rest of the Jewish rabbinate and people, they left, they ran, they couldn't handle it. Only Lubavitch stayed. I mean, there were many others that stayed and kept it, but it was, everybody knows. It was Chabad underground that fought and fought. And throughout all the years from when the Rebbe became Rebbe, the Rebbe had emissaries, secret spies. The Rebbe was in contact with the Jews of Russia all the time. And the Rebbe pulled strings from all directions, spiritually and physically. I just read a biography of a certain person who went to Russia, I think in 1960, and he went in the name of, I forgot what it was, of why he was allowed to go. And he went across the entire Soviet Union. When he came back, the Rebbe kept him in a private audience, I think, if I remember correctly, close to 6 hours. And the Rebbe debriefed him on every single place he went. The Rebbe literally was going through with him literally the map of all of Russia, as if the Rebbe was literally looking at a map. He wasn't looking at a map, but the Rebbe was literally following through as if he was familiar with every street and every road in the USSR, finding out exactly what happened in this town, what happened in this town. Did you meet him? What did you say to this person? What did he say to you? 6 hours the Rebbe debriefed him. That's only one. There's hundreds of people that the Rebbe was busy with, driving and keeping in contact, strengthening the Jews, giving them their ammunition. If not for the Rebbe, there wouldn't be a trace of Russian Jewry, of the Rebbe and the previous Rebbe. There is no question about that. So much so that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was arrested in 1927, and the Russians almost killed him. Miraculously, he was survived. But our Rebbe, do you know that in 770 there were spies? Russian spies that would come to, the Rebbe mentioned it. I just heard a personal story where the Rebbe said to someone that he did not allow, there was a certain Sefer Torah, a book, a Torah scroll that was smuggled out of Russia. I just heard this story this Shabbos. It was smuggled out of Russia. They say it was the Mezritcha Magid's, the Magid of Mezritch, the second Rebbe's Sefer Torah. A woman, someone in my shul's grandmother, wrapped the Torah around her body so she can smuggle it out of Russia. A crazy story. When she brought it to the Rebbe and gave the Torah to the Rebbe didn't allow anything to, they wanted to write on it, who sent it, and the Rebbe didn't allow, and the Rebbe said, there are spies here. The Rebbe knew that they're eavesdropping, they're listening to him. It was crazy, the Rebbe's war for Russian Jewry. Now, there's no question that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is the one who toppled the USSR. Of course, God did it. But spiritually, the Rebbe did it. And let me tell you a little secret. How this went down. Listen to this crazy thing. Brezhnev, the Russian had these all their leaders, starting with Lenin, and then I forgot there was a guy in between Lenin and Stalin, and then was Stalin, and then there was forgot the guy's name. A couple of these, right? So Brezhnev was from the 1960s all the way to 1982, 20 years. Brezhnev was, Stalin was 29 years. Brezhnev was 20, was like I think 20 years. Then suddenly there were a few Russian elected officials, who became prime ministers and died very quickly. So Brezhnev died in 1982. Andropov took over in 1982 and was, I think, in office for a year and 90 days, something like that. And he died in 1984. And then Chernenko, I think, became prime minister, or whatever they called it in Russia, the supreme head of the party, whatever, in 1985. No, he died in 1985. He became in 1984 and died in 1985. So you had three consecutive leaders, each one, he died in 1982, and then in 1984, and then in 1985. Now there's a very interesting story behind this. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Chassidim knew, this is a known fact, that the Lubavitcher, that the great Chabad Rabbeim, and other tzaddikim also did this in the early days, like on the students of the Baal Shem Tov, but I know in Chabad, we saw it in the recent years as well, would have a lot to say on who would be prime minister, presidents, ministers in the governments. Why? Because they had direct contact with Almighty God, because they're very, very high tzaddikim, and when a tzaddik decrees something, he has effects on the world. So there was a statement that Chassidim would always say that the Tzemach Tzedek, I think the previous Rebbe is the one who revealed that. I think so. I'm not sure. He said that the Tzemach Tzedek used gemacht Seder in Peterburg. It's a Yiddish phrase, which means that the Tzemach Tzedek on Rosh Hashanah, when things are decided in heaven, the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the third Chabad Rebbe, would make order in St. Petersburg. What does that mean? That when the Tzemach Tzedek did not like a certain individual, when he would take a look in St. Petersburg, he would see who's being appointed for various different ministering jobs. And when he didn't like a guy because they thought he was too anti-Semitic or whatever it is, he would basically put an X on the guy's head. And, a few days, weeks, or months later, the guy would just die. And they would appoint someone else. And that's what the Tzemach Tzedek would do. In 1982, and in 1984, and in 1985, those 3 years, the Rebbe mentioned this thing of the Tzemach Tzedek on Rosh Hashanah or right during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. Chassidim knew that when the Rebbe mentions that means the Rebbe is basically doing what his great-grandfather did. He has the same name like his great-grandfather. His great-grandfather was Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and the Rebbe carries that same name. So when the Rebbe would say, in 1982, and in 1984, and in 1985, in Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbe would say, my great-grandfather would make order in Petersburg. That was the way the Rebbe was doing the exact same thing. And basically, I'm scared to say this, maybe I shouldn't say it. He would take out whoever he felt he needs to take out. So I spoke about this Shabbos, and I had two women over here in the shul when I spoke about this by the Kiddush, by our Shabbos Farbringen. And the women came over, they're both from the Soviet Union, and they said to me, yes, they remember they were in school. Every year there was another state funeral. And they were wondering, it was strange because the state, Brezhnev, the guy before him, died 20 years earlier. And the other guy, all these guys, they're suddenly dying, year after year. There was 3 of them, one after another. Because when it came 1982, it became time, as we said, it's already Shnas Bias Moshiach. It's time to move the world further. So the last bastion that's not allowing Jews to move, that keeping Jews in a prison, was Soviet Jewry. That was locked behind an iron curtain. So we had to move things about. When the Rebbe didn't like the prime minister, whatever. Until 1985. March 11th, listen to this. This is crazy stuff. March 11th, 1985, Michael Gorbachev, how do they call him? Mikhail Gorbachev, as we know him, became the supreme head of the party, head of the Communist Party in Russia. Now, we all know Gorbachev was the one who dismantled the Soviet Union. Ooh, so the Rebbe clearly waited till his man was in office. How do we know that? A month later, after Gorbachev, March 11th, Gorbachev becomes president, or whatever they call it, in April of that year. Okay, now that's the thing. This is a half a year before 1986, or before the year Tafshin Mem Vav, before the 40-year period that we're talking about now. It's during that time that the Rebbe, there was a great Russian refusnik. His name was Professor Yirmiyahu Branover. So he was a refusnik who came out, he immigrated from Russia. I don't know, somehow he got out earlier. I don't know which year he got out. Maybe in the early 1980s, maybe in the 70s. I'm not exactly sure when he got out. He's a professor, really cool professor in hydro. I forgot really what it was. Anyways, he was a Chabad Chassid. Now, he came to America in 1985 in April. The Rebbe had his secretary call Rabbi Branover, Professor Branover, and asked him, I think, to come to 770. And the Rebbe gave him over a message, a clear prophecy. Talking about literally a prophecy like Samuel the prophet, like Elijah the prophet. The Rebbe said to him, and why am I saying it's such a crazy prophecy? Because you're soon going to hear. The Rebbe said to him, please contact your friends who are still behind the Iron Curtain and let them know that good days are coming. They're coming out very soon. The doors of Russia, of the Soviet Union, the curtain is going to break open. The Iron Curtain is going to break open, and millions of Jews are going to come out, and everybody will be able to leave. The Jews and the friends, he contacted one or two, whoever he contacted, this is his witness saying this. He says they were in utter shock and disbelief. It was impossible for them even to conceive it. And one of them even said to Professor Branover, you should know that when we're talking right now on the phone, they're bugging us and they're listening to what you're saying. In other words, it was still so, the what we call the Russian, the doors of Russia, and the control of the Communist Party was still in such force. There was no sign of any weakening. But the Rebbe said that it's going to change. Now, Gorbachev was a reformist from the very beginning. He was campaigning or promising or some reform. So you would argue the Rebbe knew, because the Rebbe knew his politics. In 1992, after Gorbachev was not in office anymore, whoever took over, Yeltsin or whatever, Gorbachev came to Israel. And he was in a meeting with Professor Branover. He met with Professor Branover. Obviously, he now dismantled the Iron Curtain, allowed the Jews out. So one of the refuseniks and someone who was so a major figure in resettling the Jewish people in Israel and so on and so forth, he met with him. Professor Branover told him that in 1985, as a month after he became president, the Rebbe already told him then that that the doors of Russia are going to open soon. Gorbachev almost fell out of his chair. Gorbachev said, how in the world did the Rebbe know that? I did not know that. This was not my plan. I didn't have at all a plan. My modernizations had nothing to do with the Jews, and I wasn't planning at all to do this. What happened that I changed, whatever else happened later. But not at that time. How did the Rebbe knows this? Gorbachev could not believe that the Rebbe knew what he would do before he even thought of doing it. That's why I'm saying it's a wild prophecy. It's not like this. One thing prophecy is that you have a certain energy, a certain sense, you can feel what other people are saying quietly, you're eavesdropping. That's one level. Here it wasn't yet in the stratosphere. Gorbachev didn't plan it on it at all. More than that, the Rebbe had a very, very different way of dealing with. So why am I saying this? What I'm saying is that the Rebbe was very instrumental on getting Gorbachev onto the chair, into the position of power. And then the Rebbe was very instrumental in rewiring Gorbachev's brain. You understand? That's why it's clear that the Rebbe had one guy, he didn't like the guy. He said, I can't work with him. Let's get someone else on. A year later, the other guy's off. Boom, he assassinated. Oops, I didn't want to say that. I want to get into trouble. But took him out. Spiritual assassination. Not physically, spiritual. And then a third one. Until he had his man. And then even before the guy knew it, the Rebbe knew already that he was going out. How? Because he has divine communication. Now, here's an amazing thing. Do you know that? And then later, the whole Soviet Union collapsed. Also, and the Rebbe pointed this was miraculous. This is Messianic. Why? Because it wasn't through bloodshed. It was a revolution without bloodshed. Amazing. That's only Moshiach. And the Rebbe said that is already Mashiach's action in this world. The Rebbe identified. Comes out that who opened up the Iron Curtain in 1990, 1989 to let the Jewish people, it was the Rebbe, which to me is without a question that this is Mashiach's work. So now let's take a breath a second here. Comes out according to this, again, we have to now work our way backwards. Comes out according to the second opinion of the Zohar. We started this class. The time of the resurrection is 40 years after the gathering of the exiles. Right? The gathering of the exiles is going to be 40 years before the resurrection. The time of the resurrection, we said, is, according to the later opinion, is 210 years. 210 years lands us to which year? 210 years before the year 6000 lands us in the year 2030. So let's reverse 40 years, 1990. When did the mass exodus of Jews come out of Russia happen? In 1989, 1990. 1 million Jews went up in 1990, 1991, through, I think, till 1992 and 1993, left Russia. So that fits very perfect. 40 years before that will be the gathering of the exiles. It doesn't mean the complete gathering of the exiles. It means the first batch of the gathering. As we said earlier, the main gathering of the exiles is going to happen after the temple is standing. But this is a prelude. This is already the beginning. This is Moshiach beginning already his actions in this world before the final redemption and complete redemption. Oh, but hold on, we have the other opinion, Rabbi Yitzchak, and that's the exciting opinion, that it's this year. It's not 2010 years, it's 2014 years before. If it's 2014 years, it brings us to 1986. That's exactly when Gorbachev was in power. So even though technically it didn't happen, in 1986, by the way, only 900 Jews were left Russia. In 1987, 8,011 Jews. I like those numbers. 8,000. In 1987, already it started breaking. You literally, but the inner workings of the rewiring of Gorbachev's brain and whatever happened in Russia, that whole shakeup was one of the most stunning. I mean, I don't know I'm sure historians to explain how that happened. Such an impossible, powerful force. You see how North Korea is so hard to break out of. The Soviet Union. And how suddenly, just in 2-3 years, boom, was it Reagan? Who did tear down the wall? What was it? It's clearly the hand of God. Driven by Moshiach. That's the beginning of the resurrection. Guys, this is crazy. And it fits exactly with the years we're talking about. So first in 90, and wait. And what does the Zohar say? That during those 40 years, is going to be a time of suffering and wars against the Jewish people. I ask you, when did the entire Intifada start? Go. The Intifadas, the whole Palestinian cause, it all started in the early 1990s. That's when you had the first Intifada, because that's when the Oslo Accords were made. And when were the Oslo Accords made? right when the Rebbe had a stroke, right after that. This is a war against Moshiach. This is a war against the Jewish people. And you will say on those days that I have no desire, because Moshiach is hidden. You know how painful this time was? This is the time that Moshiach, the Rebbe, is hidden from the world. There's never been a time in history that the Jewish leader was not visible. There's no Jewish leadership. There's rabbis, there's scholars, but a global leader that leads the Jewish people, we don't have. We have those who know, but on a physical, open manifestation, no. These 40 years. And it lands, and it also makes so much sense why though from 1982 till 1986, it's that period that the Rebbe is getting everybody to be inscribed in the book. Everybody should be inscribed in the book. And the Rebbe calls that year, the first year of it, Bias Mashiach, the time of Mashiach, because that's when Mashiach goes into full throttle action. And this year is also the last year of the you mentioned the Gates of Daniel, which puts the 45 plus whatever the amount of years are since the placing of the mosque. So everything, it's literally, everything is actually coming together in a magnificent puzzle. In a magnificent puzzle. And we arrive right now to the time of what? Of the resurrection after the 40 years. And what I'm saying, according to my thesis over here, this is the first resurrection, which is going to include Moshiach himself. And a temple. So, someone in New York sent to me. So I want to share with you two great things, just awesome things. 5, this year is called Tafshin Pei Vav, which is 786. This is the year of 786. It's 5,786. But we focus on the 786. 786 is the exact numeric value of Keser Elyon, which means crown heights, but also means the supernal crown. According to Kabbalah and mysticism, please listen to this. The resurrection happens because the Keter, the infinite light of God, is downloaded into this world. And only that infinite light causes all dead things to come alive. Which means if we're entering into the era of the resurrection, wouldn't it not make sense that enters in the year 786, which is numeric value of Keser Elyon, supernal crown, which is from where the resurrection comes from. The words of the Zohar, Tala de Notif Ma'atika, it's the dew that comes from Atik Yomin, which Atik Yomin is Keser Elyon, Ancient of Days. This is this year. So someone on our WhatsApp sent me 2 days ago, and I bless him. Shame I don't have his name. But credit is given to him. It's not mine. There is a blessing we say when Mashiach comes, when resurrection happens. Actually, it's a blessing that we say when we didn't see a friend for a year. When you haven't seen a friend for a year, you make a blessing. It's called Baruch Techiyas HaMeisim, which means Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Techiyas HaMeisim, which means since you didn't see someone for a year, it's like as if that person died in your consciousness. If you see the person after a year, you say, oh, I see you. Blessed is God who resurrects the dead. But this blessing is we're actually going to make it when we're going to see the first person who died come back to life, we're all obligated to make this blessing. You can do the math. I did it. The words Baruch Techiyas HaMeisim is numeric value 786. Exact this year. Literally, Baruch Techiyas Ham with a Hey HaMeisim, the one who resurrects the dead. Numeric value this year 786. So based on all of this, it should not be a shock why on Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of this powerful year, we're standing at this moment, why the nations are in panic mode. Why, out of all days, they all get together in the UN and suddenly out of nowhere, they all have this unbelievable urge that they can't control themselves. They must, France and England and Australia and Canada and Belgium and Luxembourg and I don't know who else, whatever, a bunch of other losers, get up there and declare they recognize a Palestinian state that doesn't exist. There's no Palestinian. What are you recognizing? It doesn't exist. No, they have to get it out of their system. They have to declare their allegiance to a Palestinian state. Why? Because they all know that game is over. And they're trying frantically to stop it. They're trying to stop the redemption. But as I told you in the beginning, God has been laughing already a long time at this attempt. So I think something happened that's really, really telling, and it is really, really crazy. President Trump came to the UN on Rosh Hashanah. He gave his speech on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, we all know that in front of Trump, everybody's a nobody. Whoever wants to pretend that this guy's power, there's only one guy today power, one guy playing, him and Putin maybe. And Trump is the player now, okay? And they all listen to him. They're scared of him. Not because they like him. They don't like him. But he's earned respect. And everybody knows you don't want to mess with Trump. Fine. When he comes to the UN and gives a speech, everybody's listening. The world is listening. He came to the UN this on Rosh Hashanah. Now, I want to say something about Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is a day, it's called the brain of the year, the head of the year. It's not just the beginning of the year, it's the head of the year. And therefore, on Rosh Hashanah, we know that every small little thing that happens in Rosh Hashanah is symbolic. Carries with its symbolism for the entire year. That's why we conduct ourselves in Rosh Hashanah and many things that we do what's called simanim. We do various different signs, and these signs have like great spiritual meaning. They indicate something. Simana milsahi, a siman on Rosh Hashanah. For example, and that's why we're careful Rosh Hashanah. We're not supposed to go to sleep during the day. It says if you sleep, you can have a sleepy year, like things like that. We're very, very, it's like superstition, but it's not, it's the one time of the year that we're like, and we eat certain foods because they symbolize certain things. They mean something. So the fact that Trump goes to the UN and literally slams the UN and slams the leaders sitting there one by one. He's so embarrassed, the UN. I mean, he embarrassed himself a little bit too, but he talks, but he's so disrespected the whole organization of the UN. He literally just dropped, or you say truth bombs. He just let them hear it as they hear. They're a bunch of good for nothings. He said, I resolved 7 wars. You guys didn't help me anything. Nothing. I didn't get anything from. What did you do? You're only creating problems. You haven't resolved anything. You're just a bunch of misfits. Literally, he's going and he's berating them. Now, I take that as very, very, very symbolic. Because, a kingdom and an empire and a government is only worth the respect that it has. The moment it's cheapened and it's disrespected, you lose all the power. That's why a king is never allowed to be seen in front of the people in a disrespectful manner. In Judaism, there's a lot of laws about a king. A king is not allowed to you're not allowed to see the king taking a haircut because it's a certain lack of dignity. The king is not allowed to do work in front of anybody, any kind of labor, because he's a king. So when you disrespect, he literally looked at the entire world leadership and he disrespected the whole organization. To me, that means that spiritually, the powers that have been in play for thousands of years have lost power this year. That's what it means. but I'm going to dare to say something else. And maybe I'm not happy with Trump's behavior the last couple of days. He's trying to make peace. He's trying to make peace. Peace is a very, very important ideal, but you're not going to make peace now and cause bloodshed tomorrow. The world has to stop playing games and pretending. You're never going to fix the Middle East by fake bandages. You're not going to do it unless you're going to fully acknowledge the truth and lay the truth bare to its bones. Unless you're going to do that, you're not fixing anything. You have to stay, because you're only going to kick the barrel down, and tomorrow you can't make deals with people who don't want your existence to happen. There's no deals with no terrorist organization. You don't make a deal with Hamas. You obliterate them completely. And the PLO, which is another face of the same Hamas, just the more, sophisticated side, is also a terrorist organization. You just don't talk to them. The whole notion of exchanging hostages for murderers, and one hostage to be released for 1,000 murderers or a few hundred murderers who have life sentence for murdering and killing people. What kind of insanity is that? What are you encouraging? It's that the monsters in the world see that a Jew is worth 1,000 terrorists. So which Jew is not going to be a target, God forbid, to be taken, to be snatched off the street as a hostage? It is insane. The Rebbe cried about it, and the Rebbe said, you don't do that. The Torah doesn't allow us to do that. We care, our hearts bleed for the hostages, but you don't exchange hostages. The Rebbe said, if you're going to do any exchange, it's 1 for 1. Never more than that. Because then you're just putting bounty on the head of every single Israeli, every soldier, every Israeli, and every Jew across the world. Because you're going to take the Jews, because it's so worth it for you to have one, because if you're one day you're going to need to wheel and deal, you'll be able to dangle the Jew and say, oh, the Jews will do. The Jews care about life so much, they're willing to give everything. They'll sell out. They'll give us, we can do terrorist attacks, and God forbid, murder people and go to life in jail. Israel should really execute the terrorists. It should be a death penalty, one after another. And now that they keep them in there, but then they go out. It's like a revolving door. Why? The thing is insane. And Trump knows better. He's not an idiot. If there's anybody who's street smart, if there's anybody who's a practical guy, it's Donald, and I love him. Meaning, he's done the best things for the Jews. But this is insanity what he's doing now. And then he goes and he makes this announcement that got me really, 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 I don't want to say the word. He makes this ridiculous announcement. I will never allow, Israel won't dare annex, or not have to annex it, claim sovereignty. On what? On Hebron. That's our land. That's where our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are buried. Our matriarchs, our mothers. That's the ancient Judah. That is King David's land. Who is Donald Trump to announce that that he's not gonna allow that? He forgot. He forgot that a bullet missed him by so much because God saved him. For what purpose did Hashem save him? To be the right person at the right time, and not to fall for the lies that every president has been falling for. Trump was one person who had the guts to get up against everybody. So why is he making such announcements? I don't know what happened to him in this sense. Maybe the desire for winning finally. He knows he doesn't have that much longer in office. 3 years. He has to win a global what is it called? The Nobel Peace Prize. Or maybe it's wheeling and dealing with Saudi Arabia that he wants to make billions or whatever it is. I don't know what it is. But that's not kosher. That's not kosher what's happening. And I'm very not happy with that. And putting pressure on Israel. It's insane. I'm praying that Hamas does not accept this deal. That, and maybe that's his intention. I don't know. Because I admire him tremendously. I admire him tremendously. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt that he knows Hamas would not do it, so he's just playing with them, and he's giving Israel an excuse to be able to eradicate them. Let's hope that's what it is. That this is only a facade. And if that's the case, I ask of President Trump forgiveness. Because again, he has tremendous credit, at least in my book. But here's the thing. To me, President Trump is an instrument in the hands of God and an instrument in the hands of Moshiach. He came to the Rebbe to pray a year ago, and the Rebbe was the one who changed the course. And I think clearly the reason Kamala is not in office and he's in office is because the Rebbe made that change when he came to pray by the Rebbe on that day. You can see it on Poly Market. That's the day he started shifting, and the bet started betting in Trump's favor. So he should not forget that he's been given a task, and the Qatari money, and the Saudi Arabian money, or the Nobel Peace Prize, or anything else should not be the consideration when we're dealing with blood. You realize it's not just Jewish blood, it's Palestinian blood as well. Because if you keep this cycle of violence going, everybody dies. But you can't resolve something that goes back thousands of years, something of biblical history, with false narratives, with false solutions. It doesn't work. So his peace plan is 21 peace plan. It's garbage. Israel must finish the job and eradicate Hamas and completely clean out Gaza. Take Gaza over because it's Jewish land. Take over the whole place. How, what, and when? Yes, I know I have a messianic vision. So if you don't have a messianic vision and you're coming just from a secular standpoint, it's a big problem. But I'm coming from Torah's perspective. Now is the time. This is what needs to happen. So I think a big sign happened. This is my own thing. I don't know if this is... I think Trump coming to the UN on Rosh Hashanah with his wonderful wife, First Lady Melania, stepping onto the escalator, and the escalator suddenly stopping right when he's on the escalator, which was a big embarrassment to the president, was not... And I don't know if heads were flying in the UN. I don't know if someone decided to play a prank on the president on purpose. I would doubt that someone would be so crazy to mess with him. I don't know, but maybe someone tried. I have a feeling that it was an angel from above that disconnected that escalator. Why? Because the time of President Trump's rulership and kingship has also come to a conclusion. What do I mean? I mean, he can work out his term. I'm not, God forbid, I wish him only the best. And what I mean to say is that once it comes the time for Mashiach to reveal himself, then it's Mashiach's kingdom. It's already no more this guy and no more that guy. Again, I love President and I wish him the best. And he should be the one that Mashiach should honor and respect and give him a big fan. I'm sure he will get a medal. But the time of power, I think, has now expired. Even for Trump. The fact that Rosh Hashanah, his elevator means going up, has stopped. And not only that, his teleprompter. When he got up and teleprompter is, that's basically his ability to communicate with the teleprompter, also went down. And a whole power of a king is his speech, is his words. The fact that both those things flopped on him in the UN, which means publicly in front of the entire world, that's the deal. It's not just, if in the White House, it's in front of America. But here it's in front of the world. It's in the world organization. He dismantled every kingdom by making fun of them all. And by the way, one of the things he said, which I thought was like the funniest thing, he said, I concluded, I resolved 7 wars. And UN didn't even help me. You didn't help me. You didn't help me anything. What did you give me? You said you gave me a broken elevator and a broken teleprompter. That was so funny. But I think the fact that it broke on him is very, very telling. What it's telling is the kingdom of Esau has come to an end, of Esav has come to an end. And the kingdom of Yaakov, V'yered mi Yaakov, and the rulership, the Melech HaMoshiach, the king of Yaakov, the time of his leadership and kingship has arrived. That's good news. Now I just need that God should agree to everything I said. And we should see it happen. I did my best to present the case for redemption this year, for redemption now. I think there's a lot of evidence here for good. May we see big miracles. May we see big things. May Moshiach stand up already. Take a set of exile. There is a woman who reached out to me when she heard me begin talking about this last 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago it was when I mentioned the first time that this year might be the year of the resurrection, and she said, very interesting. I mean, this is just it's a private story with a private person. So, but she told me that she discovered this idea already close to a year and a half ago about this year, and she got very excited about it. And it was at the same time that she works in the office, I think, of one of the Rebbe's secretaries, and she secured for herself a dime. The Rebbe used to give coins for children, so some of those coins were saved. So she secured for herself one of those dimes, and she made for herself a necklace. At the same time, when she was getting excited about this thing, she had a dream. Literally, at the time when she got her necklace, maybe it was the first day she had her necklace, she had a dream, and in her dream, the Rebbe came to her in a dream, and the Rebbe told her to publicize this idea that the time of resurrection is 5786. It's an element of dreams, so dreams have to always be taken with a grain of salt. It's a private person's dream. I can't vouch for thing and whatever, but I just found that was interesting that she told me that, so I'm sharing with it. Usually we say a Rebbe coming to a dream is not fake, it's real. It's not fake news. There's a lot of Hasidic backing to that idea. But I'm just sharing this. So I'm excited. I'm pumped up. But the more of this, it's not so much, and I want to say, how do we live with this? What does this mean to me and you? Number one, no more depression, no more sadness, no more thing. First of all, we're over the 40 dark years. We're coming into a whole new era. And also, it come to life. This means that we should be b'simcha. I know I was yelling before and getting a little upset because I get passionate about it. But really, the real attitude now has to be tremendous joy and tremendous happiness and tremendous love and tremendous goodness. And, Trump has a few days to do tshuva till Yom Kippur for what he said. I'm sure he will rectify it. He's a good guy. He's a good guy, and he's done for the Jewish people amazing things. And everybody needs to know their job. And according to the Torah, one of the jobs of the last leader of Esav is to bring the treasures to Mashiach, so that Mashiach can build a temple and only good things. May we merit the full and complete redemption, and may it be right now.